You know, there's a pattern in history. It's a six-stage sequence, a kind of script that has toppled governments for the last 250 years. It's a script written in chaos, and some people believe it's playing out again, right now.
So that brings us to the big, unsettling question we're looking at today. Is the United States unknowingly following this exact same pattern? Stage by stage, grievance by grievance? And are we getting dangerously close to a point of no return?
Okay, let's get right into this. And hey, if you want to understand these deep patterns that shape our world and the global financial system, do us a favor and hit that like, share, and subscribe button for the Global Finance Archive channel. You won't want to miss what's coming.
Now, before we go any further, we have to get the official stuff out of the way. This AI-generated video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not financial or political advice, and all of the historical comparisons we're going to make are theoretical. So please, always do your own research.
The framework we're digging into today is this six-stage cycle of collapse. And what's fascinating is that we've seen it play out in nations that seemed incredibly stable and powerful. Think about France in 1789, the massive Russian Empire in 1917, and even a place like Cuba in 1959. And every single time, the ruling class never, ever saw it coming. So understanding these six stages is absolutely crucial. Here's how it works. It all starts with stage one, extreme wealth inequality, a huge chasm between the haves and the have-nots. That's followed pretty closely by stage two, widespread government corruption and incompetence, a kind of rot that just spreads from the very top. Then you get to the real turning point, stage three, where the middle class is destroyed and becomes radicalized. Their hopes just turn to dust. From there, you hit stage four, a total loss of faith in all institutions. It leaves this vacuum of trust, and that creates the perfect breeding ground for stage five, where a revolutionary movement gains mass support. And the final, predictable outcome? Stage six. The government is overthrown and complete chaos follows.
And this is what's so wild. Despite completely different centuries, different cultures, and totally different ideologies, the script stays shockingly consistent. Let's take a look at the history and see for ourselves.
Okay, let's start with France in 1789. This is a textbook case of stage one, extreme wealth inequality. Get this, just 1.5% of the population, that's the clergy and nobility, they owned 35% of all the land and paid pretty much zero taxes. The entire burden fell on everybody else, people who were just struggling to put food on the table. Then comes stage two, government incompetence. King Louis XVI's government was completely bankrupt from fighting foreign wars, yet the nobility blocked every single attempt at financial reform. They would rather see the country burn than give up a single one of their privileges.
And what happens next? Well, as John F. Kennedy famously said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. It's just a fact. When a system refuses to fix itself, the pressure just builds and builds until it explodes. France proved it, and some people would argue we're seeing that exact same kind of pressure building in the United States today.
All right, now let's jump forward to Russia in 1917 and see how this pattern builds. Here, the inequality was almost feudal. I mean, the Tsar and the nobility owned practically everything. 80% of the population were peasants with no land, living in just absolute poverty and despair. And at the top, you had Tsar Nicholas II, a weak and totally out-of-touch leader. His disastrous handling of World War I led to 3 million Russian casualties and a complete economic collapse. The rot was absolute, and the people, they were at their breaking point.
And into this total vacuum of leadership stepped the Bolsheviks. While the government was fumbling around, Lenin made a simple, powerful promise that hit on every single grievance the people had: peace, land, and bread. I mean, think about it. It was a message that cut right through to a nation on its knees, a real promise of hope when there was nothing but despair.
And you know, this pattern isn't just for old empires. Take a look at Cuba in 1959. On paper, it was a pretty prosperous nation, but all that wealth was packed into Havana. American companies and a tiny elite loyal to the dictator Fulgencio Batista controlled the entire economy. Batista's government was basically a machine for theft, defined by violence and corruption. It existed for one reason, to make him and his inner circle rich, while the vast majority of Cubans were just left behind.
Now, what's really fascinating here is who led the revolution. It wasn't the poorest of the poor. It was the radicalized middle class. Fidel Castro, he was a lawyer, and at his trial back in 1953, he famously declared, "History will absolve me." This just goes to show that when the educated class, the very people who are supposed to uphold the system, turn against it, well, that regime's days are numbered. And that is a truly chilling thought for any nation, including the United States.
So, we've seen the pattern in France, in Russia, in Cuba, and now it's time to turn that mirror on ourselves. How do these historical warnings actually apply to the United States today? Are we just sleepwalking towards the very same fate?
And as we get into these really critical data points, just take a second to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. You're absolutely going to want to be here for more data-driven historical analysis like this, as we explore the forces that are shaping our world and, well, our future. So let's start with stage 1 again, extreme wealth inequality. Right now, in the United States, the top 1% controls 32% of the nation's wealth. Now, to put that into perspective, that figure is actually higher than the share that was held by the French nobility back in 1789. That's a fact that should send a shiver down the spine of anyone who's paying attention to history.
I mean, the scale of this disparity is just staggering. The top 0.1%, that's about 130,000 households, now own more wealth than the entire bottom 90%. That's 117 million households. So a tiny, tiny fraction of the population has more wealth than the vast majority of Americans combined. That is a classic recipe for social unrest.
Now let's talk about stage 2, government incompetence. Public trust in Congress is currently sitting at just 15%. 15. When the vast majority of people don't trust their own legislature to act in their best interests, the legitimacy of the government itself starts to just erode. And when that happens, the very foundations of the nation begin to crumble. And you can see why there's so much distrust. The United States national debt has blown past $36 trillion. Key issues just go unaddressed. Infrastructure is literally crumbling, and a lot of people feel like the government only serves its donors and special interests, while the needs of ordinary citizens are just completely ignored. This brings us to a really critical threshold in the cycle. This is the stage where faith in the core institutions of a nation, we're talking the courts, the elections, the rule of law itself, begins to completely break down. This is often seen as the point of no return. It's that moment when a country crosses a line from which it cannot easily come back.
So according to the source materials analysis of this pattern, the United States is currently in stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. Trust in the media, the police, the courts, it's all at historic lows. A huge portion of the population believes elections are rigged. And when citizens no longer believe in the legitimacy of their own shared institutions, a country stops being united. The bonds that hold it all together just start to fray.
So if we really are in stage 4, the historical script gives us a pretty stark warning about what's next. What would stage 5, mass support for a revolutionary movement, and stage 6, the actual overthrow of the government, what would that really look like in a country like the United States? This is the question that nobody really wants to think about, but the pattern demands we ask it. Based on the chaos we saw in France and Russia, what would the end of this cycle, stage 6, look like in a modern, complex, and heavily armed nation like the United States? The answer? Well, it is not a pleasant one to think about. History doesn't give us an exact blueprint, but it does offer some grim warnings. You could see an escalation of organized political violence, neighbor turning against neighbor. The loyalty of the military and police could fracture, which would lead to a total breakdown of law and order. National supply chains for food, for fuel, they could collapse, leaving store shelves empty and people hungry. The economy itself could implode as trust just evaporates and the value of our currency plummets. You might even see states refusing to recognize federal authority. And you can be sure that foreign adversaries would almost certainly interfere to make the chaos even worse. It's a perfect storm of destruction. And this all brings us to the final crucial takeaway for the global financial system. The value of a nation's currency, its status as a reserve asset, it isn't just based on economic output. It is fundamentally based on political stability. When a nation falls into internal chaos, the world's faith in its currency will inevitably follow, and that could have absolutely catastrophic consequences for the entire global economy. You know, they say history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. To really understand the patterns of the past and the risks of the future, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the Global Finance Archive channel. The answers, they aren't hiding in the future, they're written in the past, and it's up to all of us to learn from them before it's too late.